Bernie and I actually have a really cool story of how we met, but we didn't meet at PodFest. We both traveled to PodFest separately, and there was a table in the middle of the room, and it had all of these business cards on it. And I went up and I saw that Bernie talks about, he has a podcast, the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast. And as you know, I'm about all things midlife and really realizing our impact at midlife and beyond that we're here to have. And I contacted Bernie to just check out his show. And he said, I went to that same table and there was one card that I picked up and it was yours. So somehow we are supposed to be talking about midlife together, I think. Bernie is a husband, father, grandfather, and he's been a podcaster for 10 years. I would love to know more about this. You're an original B2B content marketer, and content marketing is my very favorite thing. So we'll definitely talk about that. He can speak in front of crowds of thousands without being afraid or anxious, but heights of more than 10 feet off the ground scare him to death. He does not like the ocean, but he lives in Florida. And he's passionate about helping people thrive at midlife. And that's what we're going to be diving in on today with Bernie. We're going to talk a lot about, he has the 5 pillars of fulfillment at midlife.
Welcome to Unjaded. I'm your host, Vicki Dixon. This is a podcast with a human design spin on building the life, the relationships, and the business that you were made for. Let's dive in.
Okay, so welcome to the Unjaded podcast. My guest today is Bernie Borges, and I probably just butchered your last name, did I?
It is pronounced Borges, rhymes with gorgeous, like my wife and my daughter.
I love that. I love that. So welcome to the podcast, Bernie. I'm excited to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Vicki. I'm excited to be here.
So let's just talk about your human design for a second here before we dive in. You are a projector and you do a lot of things as a projector. I think there's a little bit of a misconception that projectors need to be tired all the time. You don't seem like a tired guy to me, but they need to be tired all the time and they can't do lots of things. And you have had a corporate career for how long?
Let's call it 40 years. 40
years and a side hustle as a podcaster for 10 years. And it seems like you have a big full life.
Yeah. Now, 15 of those 40 years include my own business. I had an agency, a B2B content marketing agency for 15 years. So that's part of the 40 years. I started my first job at a very young age. I was about 20. And then I worked in different roles in corporate. And then I had my own agency for 15 years. And then I did the unthinkable, Vicki. After 15 years of running my own agency, I rolled the dice and I merged it with a few others. We did a roll up of 3 other companies and we went to market as a new company, not as an agency. We were totally pivoting. And after 4 years of making that a go, I threw in the towel and I just said, I'm not happy, don't like what I'm doing. I don't even like the direction things are headed. And I did the unthinkable and I took a corporate job and I've been back in a corporate job for about 3 years now, vice president of global content marketing for a pretty large company. And I enjoy it. But to your point, I started podcasting 10 years ago and you and I run video and you see this big microphone that's next to my face. I always joke, Vicki, that it's an appendage because I've been in front of this microphone now for about 10 years. So I thoroughly enjoy podcasting and I'm honored to be with you on the Unjaded podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. So when I looked at your website and the some of the stuff that I was poking around on there, you talk about fulfillment at midlife, and you say that looking at your whole life and trying to look at fulfillment through the lens of your whole life would be like trying to boil the ocean. So how did you come to talking about fulfillment at midlife? Like, what was the catalyst for that?
Love this question, Vicki. And I'm actually, if it's okay with you, going to answer it in 2 parts. First, how did I come to talk about midlife, and then why fulfillment? So as I mentioned, I've been podcasting for 10 years. I was in between podcast shows back in late 2021. So I was searching for my next podcast. I had retired my previous podcast, the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. It's still out there. I had retired that at episode 300. And that was a B2B focused podcast about marketing. And so because of the phase that I'm in my life, I started thinking about midlife. I started doing some research on midlife. I'm like, okay, I can really sink my teeth into this whole midlife topic. And as I dug into it, Vicki, as I dug and dug, what I discovered is that there's hundreds of podcasts on midlife. Almost all of them, like probably 99% of them, are hosted by women, and they're focused on women, on topics like menopause and divorce and related topics. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's more to midlife than that. And obviously, I'm not a woman. And so as I dug deeper, I found more on this concept of happiness. Who doesn't want to be happy? We all want to be happy. I want to be happy. Vicky, you want to be happy? We all want to be happy. But then I dug into that and realized that there's a distinction between happiness and fulfillment. Fulfillment is more soul level deep. It's really more associated with achievements, whereas happiness is more of an emotion. And nobody was out there or is out there except me, Bernie Borges, talking about fulfillment in midlife on the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. That's how I arrived at both midlife and the focus on fulfillment.
I love that, because we do, the pursuit of happiness is strong, but it can be really kind of elusive, or how do we even define that? But fulfilled, like when you can be fulfilled in your everyday life. And I know that you are familiar with the scriptures. I was raised in the church, so I'm familiar with the scriptures a little bit, but it reminds me of the Bible verse, something like, be content in whatever circumstance you find yourself. And there's something to be said for contentment, not that we're not striving for things, not that we don't have goals, but it's like, can we be fulfilled with where we are in life? And, our station in life, I guess, is kind of interesting. And you break it down into 5 different pillars of life, I guess, that you're looking for fulfillment in all 5 different areas. So what are those 5 areas?
Sure. By the way, I think the scripture you're referring to is Paul in the book of Romans, except I can't quote you the chapter and the verse.
That's okay.
So back to the earlier question about, I recommend that we don't look at our life holistically as one big ocean that we're trying to boil. I recommend that rather we look at it through these 5 pillars. And these 5 pillars are health, which is both physical and mental health, fitness, and I'll point out why I break them into separate pillars.
I was hoping you would.
Career, relationships, and legacy. And I put a lot of thought into these, and I've tested them with lots of people. And I really believe that anything you could possibly think of fits in one of those pillars. In fact, many things like money can cross many of those pillars, right? They don't necessarily belong, like money doesn't belong in just one pillar, even though it's heavily leaning in career, but it's not limited to career. So health, if we don't have our health, both physical and mental, then it's really hard for us to just function. It's hard for us to really do life. We need to have our health, and many people have health struggles and they still are able to go about doing life. But nonetheless, when our health is seriously challenged or just impeded in some way, it just makes life that much harder. Again, both physical and mental. Fitness is more about function. It's not about running marathons, nothing wrong with running marathons, but it's about being functional. It's about being able to do the things that you need to do. We were talking before we started recording. I'm in my 60s and I like to go kayaking on the weekends with my wife. Not every weekend. We can't do it, especially, the weather doesn't always accommodate. I've got yard work to do, Vicky, and I've got to lift things. I flew to Pennsylvania a few months ago and helped my son move, and we were moving all day long, and I didn't skip a beat. I kept up with him, never was out of breath. It's about being functional. It's not about, winning weightlifting, bodybuilding contests or anything like that, right? That's what fitness is. And by the way, in the US, I know you're Canadian, in the US, 60% of adults are considered to be not even doing the bare minimum exercise on a weekly basis, which is really, really sad.
Yeah, I think that Canada is pretty close to that for sure. And what is the bare minimum? Do you know? The
bare minimum is 20 minutes a day, 3 times a week.
Wow. 1 hour a week.
And that's, and really, and they even consider walking briskly as that. If you walk briskly 20 minutes a day, 3 times a week, that's considered the bare minimum. In my book, that doesn't even break a sweat. And that's considered the bare minimum. And 60% of Americans don't even do that. So, and that of course contributes to, so fitness and health are definitely related. I'm stating the obvious, but I break them out just because I think people need to really have a focus on both, especially since health is both physical and mental, right?
Mhm.
So there's health, there's fitness. The third one is career. Obviously, Vicky, career is a big part of all of us, right? We spend most of our waking life in a career, whether it's a job, a business, or a combination of the two, as it is for me. Career is big. And many, many times in midlife, people wake up at some age, oftentimes in their 40s, but not for everybody. And they go, whoa, I've been doing this for 20 years and I know it like the back of my hand, but I'm not fulfilled.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. That's a lot of people experience that. A lot of people experience that. Relationships, there's obvious and not so obvious. The obvious are things like our family, our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors, community, that sort of thing. But then those of us, people like me, perhaps you, of faith, relationships also fits there as well, right? Because we have a relationship with our beliefs, our religious beliefs, that sort of thing. And so relationships is huge because we want them to be healthy. We want them to be contributing to our happiness and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And then the last one is legacy. And this is probably the most complex one, Vicky, because we tend to think of our legacy as we age. The older we get, the more we think about legacy, which is really about what's the impact we want to have on fill in the blank. What's the impact? Like, I know that you love spending time with your grandchildren, right? So what's the impact you want to have on your grandchildren? What's the impact you want to have on your clients? What's the impact you want to have on a cause that maybe you support and you volunteer time and talent and treasure and really feel passionate about that cause, right? So legacy is something we tend to think about in sort of our later years. And I don't mean 80s and 90s. I mean, a lot of us start thinking about that in our 40s and 50s. So those are the 5 pillars. But I want to answer a question you haven't asked me yet, because I get this question a lot, and I think it's inherent to this whole conversation. And that is like, how do we define midlife, right?
Yeah. And you
Like,
know
what
what I
is
discovered?
midlife?
Midlife is a term that actually a lot of women hate that term. I was so surprised. In like my previous career, I was using the term midlife. And there was not one person in a huge survey that I did that didn't hate it. And I was like, here we all are using it. But what else are we going to call it? So first, what is midlife? And then I don't know what else we would call it. But
Yeah. There's not a lot of concrete scientific data to really define midlife. I've done some research on this. Now, I wouldn't say it's exhaustive. It's just, the Google searches and the reading and that sort of thing. And what I have found, Vicky, is that midlife is generally defined as 40s through mid 60s. I personally disagree with that. I disagree with that. I think we have 3 phases in life. 3 phases: youth, midlife, and end of life. So let me define those 3 phases. Youth, birth to about age 30. And the only reason I say about age 30 is it's really when we sort of become a full-fledged, responsible adult. And we have some maturity in us. For many of us, it's in that approximate range of about age 30. I don't know about you, but in my 20s, I thought I was smarter than I really was. I thought I was more mature than I really was. I just thought I was better than I really was. And I look back now and I go, no.
yeah.
In my 30s, I began to get my act together and take on responsibilities, marriage, children, mortgage, that kind of thing, right? So we begin midlife in our 30s. And let me also say that midlife has nothing to do with a midpoint in life. Nothing, zero. I often say we park in a driveway and we drive on a parkway, right? So you can't use words literally. Midlife has nothing to do with a midpoint in life. So then those midlife decades really span for multiple decades: 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. Then we get into an end of life phase, and that's really characterized by decline in health. I sadly, but naturally witnessed my parents go through that. They both passed away in their 90s, 93 and 94. And I watched them for about 3 or 4 years decline in health. And I knew, because it's natural, right? It's just the circle of life. I knew that they were in this end of life phase. So my father-in-law is 95 and he's going strong. I mean, no one can predict, when his time is going to come, but he's going strong. He's healthy. He still does all the activities he's been doing for the last 30 years since he retired. So that's how I define midlife, Vicky, is those decades, multiple decades, the biggest span of our life that for many of us begins in our 30s, but most people never think of themselves in midlife in the 30s. Now, regarding why people don't like the word midlife, this is my opinion. I have nothing to back this up with, just it's my opinion. And that is that I think for a lot of people, midlife is two words, and it's really midlife crisis. That's what they think of,
Yeah.
because that's actually the most searched word. If you do the keyword research, which I've done, midlife crisis is the most searched phrase associated with midlife.
Not a sad thing. I always say midlife awakening because there are there are planetary returns that happen in my human design world at around 40 and around 50 and around 58. And they are massive drivers. And what all of these planetary returns do is that they drive us further towards our purpose, or as you would say, our legacy, our impact is the word that I often use. But they're not just to like mess up our lives and have us craving something else. It is actually to push us towards our purpose. It's like, okay, it's not that we're running out of time, but we are kind of all running out of time. Like, I mean, we're not here forever and ever and ever, right? You were talking about something about the health and the fitness pillars, and you used the word focus a couple of times. And in my brain, I went, oh, but focus is such a huge part of your human design, actually. It's fascinating to see how these different things come up and relate back to our human design, in my world anyway. So you talk about if you are 80% fulfilled, you're doing great. Why? Yeah. How?
Because I think, well, first of all, I did a study in late 2021, which I published in early 2022. It was a brief study. And in that study, the biggest data point that came out of it, and I'm updating that study right now. I've got the survey out right now. Maybe we'll talk about that briefly. But the biggest data point that came out of that study, Vicki, was that of the 267 people that took the survey, 78% said that they were not fulfilled in their life. 19% said that they were fulfilled. Now, this is before I actually had even thought up of the 5 pillars. This is very early. This is just before I launched the podcast. So the 5 pillars didn't even exist in my brain at the time. I just asked the question, are you fulfilled? Mm-hmm. And 78% said no, 19% said yes. Well, look at those numbers, 80-20, right? 78 to 19. I mean, the 80-20 rule, by the way, that gave me some motivation to do some research on the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 principle. And it's fascinating how the 80-20 principle, and I'd love to know if it has any correlation to human design, but that 80-20 principle happens so much in the world, right? And there it is right there, 80%. So then when I did come up with the 5 pillars, well, imagine that you felt really fulfilled in 4 out of the 5 pillars. That's pretty good, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And guess what? That's 80%.
Amazing.
Right? Yeah. So that's why I say at the end of every episode on my Midlife Fulfilled podcast, I say, if you're 80% fulfilled, you're doing great. And what I'm trying to get across is even if you're not 80% fulfilled, don't beat yourself up. We've lived enough decades to have complexity in our life that it's okay to be seeking fulfillment until our last breath,
Well, and I think that's part of what keeps us young is continually seeking fulfillment and continually striving for something. That's how we stay on point in our lives. That's how we live fulfilled lives, is by having something to work towards. I remember when, so I don't have the same family history that you have, unfortunately. My dad, I'll be talking about that on this podcast and other places probably, but my dad, when he turned 52, he was diagnosed with dementia. And my family has lived a very unhealthy life. And I turn 52 next month. So it's really playing in my heart and I live a different lifestyle than my family does. But it's just really there for me. How would someone start? Like you talk about getting fit or being healthy, or, someone is absolutely miserable in all 5 pillars of their life, let's say, and they're turning 50. How do you go from being miserable in your life to 80% fulfilled? What's the first step?
Well, first of all, Vicki, I don't want to oversimplify it. I recognize that there are some people who may need to go to counseling or therapy or something to that effect, depending on their unique situation, circumstance. So I don't mean to oversimplify it. I don't mean to imply that there's a, one size fits all formula for this. So please, I want to be very clear about that. And I'm not a therapist. I just say these are 5 pillars. And the way that I'll answer your question is what I guide people to do is simply look at your values today. Look at your values. I don't mean morals and values you were taught as a child, because that's not what I mean. I mean, how do you want to spend your time now? Who do you want to spend your time with? What are the things that really fulfill you? And if you want to use a different word, what are the things that you really enjoy doing that bring a smile to your face, that you just feel good? Let's keep it simple. You just feel good when you're doing those things. That's what I mean by your values. So simply take your values and then align them against each of the 5 pillars, right? Your health, right? Just how am I doing the things now from a value standpoint? So for example, if I stay up to 3 o'clock in the morning watching TV, and eating, junk food, and my health is not great, well, my values are not aligned there, right? I need to revisit that, right? And I realize that a lot of people have health issues that are not self-induced, not self-imposed, they're not lifestyle, they're hereditary or whatever. But the things that we can control, we need to start with our values. And you just take that barometer and you just place it against each of the 5 pillars. Same thing with fitness. I mean, we can talk I can talk for hours about fitness, because the 2 most common things I hear about fitness for those of us in our midlife seasons are, I don't want to work out. I just have no interest in it, or I have no time.
Yeah.
So I have an answer for both of those. First of all, again, everybody's unique. I get that. But if you say you don't want to, you don't like to, well, then you have to just ask yourself, why should you? What's your value? What is it that being in better fitness condition is going to allow you to do? So I gave you a few examples. For me personally, I can go kayaking. And by the way, we often hit bad weather. So kayaking goes from easy to really hard.
It does.
But I can do it, right? I help my son move all day long, and I didn't skip a beat, didn't get out of breath, things like that, right? So it's just, what are your values, right? Same thing with career. If you're miserable in your career right now, I often use the example of a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer, or whatever. They kind of grew up expecting to become that. They went to school, got their education, their degree, went to work, did that. 20 years later, they wake up one day and go, I don't really like what I'm doing. So what are your values? What do you want to be doing? It's not an easy thing, but at least start with that self-awareness, Vicky. That's really what I'm suggesting people do, is to just have that self-awareness. A lot of people, believe it or not, and maybe this isn't so hard to believe, they sort of like push that down deep in their soul. Like in the back of their head, they know it's there, but it's like they're just like pushing it really deep in their soul. And I'm just saying, bring it up and ask yourself that question. How do I want to be spending my time? What do I want to be spending my time doing? Same thing with relationships. Where are my relationships good? Let's keep this real simple, right? Good and bad, right? And ask yourself why. And we all have had relationships that we would like to be better, or relationships that have ended and maybe we wish they didn't end. That's called life, right? So it's never going to be perfect. And then with legacy, it's just a matter of like, okay, well, where do I want to have an impact? And am I doing anything now to begin to build some impact there? So again, I try to simplify things, recognizing that there are going to be people who do need professional assistance, which I am not a therapist, but in the context of just thinking about this, just ask yourself those value questions against each of those pillars, and then see where you are with that and what steps you might be able to take by being self-aware.
And I wonder about raising our expectations. I think that's what I was going to say earlier about my own family history, is that everybody expected that they would retire young-ish and sit on the couch. Like there was never any plans. There was never any goal. Like it was just a foreign thing to think that you could be fit and healthy. Oh my gosh, in your 60s. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, 60 is a baby. Like it's so, there's so much stuff that we still want to do. Like you talk about being fit and being able to help your son move and all of those things. Like I want to be able to throw my grandkids up over my head still. I want to be able to take my grandkids in the kayak. I have 4 of them now, under 4. And I just want to be able to do all of the things with them Dr. Christiane Northrup, she has this saying, she's a big midlife women's health expert, and she has this saying, happy, healthy, dead. And it's like, that is my goal, to be happy, healthy, dead. Like, yes, we can have a decline in our 90s. That's beautiful about your parents and your father-in-law. But there's so many people who are experiencing that decline at 40 or 50, or I don't know. It's sad. It really is sad to see how we are aging.
And again, there are things that we can't control. My wife and I have had a dear friend who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 50, and she lived 6 years. I mean, that's very young. So we can't control that, right? That's something, that's an example, sad as that is, it's an example of something we can't control. So let's control the things we can control.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Control the things we can control. Give ourselves the best chance.
Yeah.
There's one other point, Vicky, that I want to make, I haven't made yet, about fulfillment. And to me, I think this is an important point. And this is where I'm able to kind of draw that distinction between fulfillment and happiness, maybe a little bit clearer. And that is that when we achieve fulfillment in something, it is immutable. I had someone recently say, Bernie, what does immutable mean? So I'll define it. It's simply a synonym for permanent. Like it's you can't take it away. Right? I'll give you a couple of simple examples. If someone completes a certification in a program or a degree, they've got that. And if they really wanted it, that's a fulfillment that's immutable. Nobody can take that away. Right? Both of my kids graduated from college without debt. That didn't happen by accident. My wife and I planned that. That is a fulfillment that is immutable. Nothing can take that away. Right? So we want to be striving toward fulfillments that are immutable, and they don't have to be big. Like my kids graduated from college without debt. Oh, that's pretty big. It can be little things. It can be a weekend house cleaning project where at the end of the weekend, like, okay, I worked hard this weekend, but that garage sure is clean now, and I feel fulfilled, by that, right?
Yeah.
And so when we have that sense of fulfillment that's immutable, that is, I call that soul level deep. And it helps us just get through life. Sometimes it helps us deal with other things that we're struggling with, which again, it's unique for everybody. Some people have big things they're struggling with. I'm not suggesting we're oversimplifying things, but if we just understand it, again, it comes back to self-awareness. It really does. We understand that distinction. Knowing that happiness is wonderful. We all want it. I want it. You want it. It's an emotion, and it can ebb and flow and ebb and flow and ebb and flow. And fulfillment is more soul level deep. It's an achievement. It is immutable.
And worth taking the time to experience, I think, because you talked a little bit earlier about how you hear how people don't want to work out and don't have the time. And that's the one that I hear the most, is like, I don't have the time. It seems like we are, and I can be guilty of this too, we are, going through all of the daily motions, putting in the hours at work, putting in the extra hours here and there, and not really, at the end of the day, sitting down and going, oh, I wanted to meditate for 20 minutes today, or I wanted to go for a walk, or I wanted to do some yoga. I wanted to go on a date night with my husband. And here we are sitting on the couch looking at each other again, because time marches on. We need to get doing what we're here to do. So your human design. Let's talk about that for a couple of minutes, if you're open to
Please.
that. So you are a projector, and I love how you are sitting here guiding. Like, as I'm listening to you, I'm going, oh, he's like the perfect guide, because projectors are our lighthouses. Like, you really are here to guide the energy of others, especially generator types, which I am. As you move through life. So have you felt that for your whole life? Have you always felt like you are here to guide, or that you're better at it than maybe some other people that you see?
Sort of. Instead of the word guide, would I have your permission to use the word teach?
Yeah.
I enjoy teaching. Earlier you shared, one of the things I shared with you, I can speak in front of an audience without blinking an eye. I don't get nervous or anything, because I'm doing something that I really, really enjoy doing. If I'm speaking, I'm teaching something, right? I'm not entertaining. I'm not a comedian. I'm not a dancer. I'm not a singer. If I'm speaking, I'm teaching something, and I enjoy that. And I think it is something that is using my faith, a God-given talent. So when I use it, I feel good about it. It's fulfilling, and it just kind of comes naturally.
And you have the 4323 channel, which we talked a smidge about when I was on your podcast. I love that channel. It is a channel of, I don't love the name for it in human design traditional language. It's genius to freak, but it's just such a unique way. You have such unique insights and the ability to bring them into form, to be able to speak about them, to be able to make them understood by many, many, many. And I love how you use that gift in your podcast and in the rest of your life. Just even talking with me, it's like, okay, let me break this down and make it simpler. This is how I came up with this. It's so cool to watch people with this 4323 channel in action. I absolutely love it. And I'm kind of curious about flow in your life. Are you someone who loves to have like structured things, or do you like to have more flow in, say, your environment? Can you work, in a cafe today, in your office another day, in a corporate office the next day, or how do things go in your life like that?
Yeah. So I think that's where like the 80-20 principle will come into play. I would say that about 80% of the time I do need and want structure, right? I'm pretty big on process. And so I want that structure. I want process, mostly out of being efficient, mostly out of getting things accomplished that I want to get accomplished. But the reason I say 80-20 and not 100-0 is that there's a little piece of me that wants to be kind of free spirited and, do something spontaneous and either unplanned or maybe break my own rule and do it this way instead of the way I've been doing it. It's a little piece of me, not a big piece. It's a little piece. That's why I say 80-20, because most of me is process oriented, but I do have that little streak in me where I might want to just kind of go off script or off road, or pick your metaphor.
Yeah, when I looked at your design, I was like, oh, he actually is built to have quite a bit of flow in his life. But you also have focus and concentration as a big theme in your design. It kind of formats everything there for you. So I can see how that would kind of show up as a bit of a conundrum in your design. And leadership. That's the first thing that I saw when I looked at this. I was like, oh gosh, leadership. He's definitely here to lead. So is that what you're doing in your corporate career? Do you feel like a leader in the field? You're definitely doing that in the podcast. And I know that you have a big dream for a media company. So lots of leading going on there. But do you feel like you've done that in all of your life?
Not all of my life. No, I think it's more in my, I'd say the last 20 years. I think it's a maturity thing, Vicky. I think, back to what I described in my 20s when I was really all about just having a good time, and then began to really mature in my 30s in terms of responsibility. So probably in my 40s is when I began to even realize that I was able to lead. And I've had leadership roles, combination of my own business where I led a team of people, and then even now in a corporate role where I'm in a leadership role. And then, as you point out through my podcast, that's absolutely what I'm attempting to do with the podcast, is to lead by communicating these concepts that I'm communicating and attempting to help people become more self-aware of this. And as you point out, I do have a vision. I do want to build a media company and put on events around these topics. So yes, I think there's definitely leadership in that. But again, I've used the word self-aware a few times. I'm big on that. I was not self-aware of this, in my 30s or younger, but I became self-aware in my 40s and beyond around leadership.
I think that's a gift of getting older, right? So many people either fear it or like complain about it. And I just think it keeps getting better and better and better because we know ourselves better and we know what we're capable of. And I feel like we have less distractions as we get older than we did when we were younger. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And confidence, that builds confidence.
So what do the next 10 years look like for you?
Well, beginning with the present day and then building up to the 10-year horizon. Well, that's a big one. But in present day, as you and I record this, I am conducting the second survey. It's simply called the Midlife Fulfillment Survey. I'm doing it in cooperation with Udemy, who is a leader in online education. That survey is available on my website, midlifefulfilled.com. And so I'm really excited about this survey, Vicky, because it is going to inform a research report that we'll produce as a result of this survey. The survey is 43 questions, so it's pretty meaty. And so I think it's going to be very foundational to content that I'll produce based on this survey and anything that follows from this survey. And that content can include a book. It can include speeches and workshops that I deliver. And then eventually This is more toward that 10-year horizon, although I hope it doesn't take 10 years to get there. Eventually become an event company, not an event company, but a media company where events are a part of the media that I'm delivering around this, right? Where we're putting on events, maybe in multiple locations, either 1 or 2 day event, probably around these 5 pillars, right? Helping people just understand further, deeper, the meaning of the 5 pillars and how they can embrace their own self-awareness around them and steps that they can take to achieve greater fulfillment. So I hope it doesn't take 10 years to get there, but I definitely think it will be something in the span of years, not months.
Yeah. And I love this. And so many people that I work with would say, but I'm a projector, so I can't. I'm a projector, so I can't be expected to do that. And here you are. And just so you know, as you're listening into this podcast episode, Bernie does not have any motors defined in his chart. So before you go thinking, oh my gosh, he must have, 3 motors defined. That's what's giving him energy. No, he has a purpose. And I think that that's really important, is that you know why you're here and what you want to leave behind. And that's such a big piece of the puzzle of getting the job done. Do you rest intentionally? Do you build in cycles of rest into your work, or do you feel like it's...
I do. Yeah. It's not during the work day, but I'm pretty disciplined about, shutting down the lights and really just going to bed by not later than 10:30, between 10 and 10:30. Now I do get up at 4:45. So what is that? About 6 hours of sleep on average. I try to make up for it on the weekends. But that's my rest. So I'm not up till midnight and then trying to get up early. It's like that window of 10 to 10:30. And then I eat well. My wife is very, very keen on just, what she calls clean eating. Mm-hmm. That's her vocabulary, and just good, healthy habits, nothing magical, nothing crazy or extreme either. But definitely the fitness thing. I get up at 4:45 because I'm going to go work out. I mean, that first hour and a half to 2 hours is mine. Mm-hmm. I don't even look at email or social media before 7:30 in the morning, and I'm up at 4:45. So I am not looking at anything except maybe, watching videos or listening to podcasts on my phone while I'm working out.
I think that's so important. So many people get up in the morning and the first thing that they do is reach for their phone. And it's like the outside world is an onslaught on your brain the minute that you get up.
Right.
I too am I'm more for journaling and quiet stuff in the morning, but yeah, definitely something before we let our brains get hit with stuff. Okay. So I really appreciate you being here today, and we're going to link in the show notes to your survey and to where people can find you. But can you just give a shout out for where people can follow along with your podcast and anything else you want them to know about you?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Vicki. I've really, really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm a fan of your Unjaded podcast. So Midlife Fulfilled is the name of the podcast. You can get it anywhere you listen to podcasts. And of course, the website is midlifefulfilled.com. You'll find the survey on the homepage. I also have a direct link to it that I can give you for show notes, but midlifefulfilled.com.
Cool. Thank you. And Bernie does episodes. He does 2 episodes a week. And so there's one episode that's like a deep dive with a guest. And then he does like a little snippet, which I listened to on the plane home from Florida, some of the snippets, so I could just get your takeaways on more episodes so I could kind of binge a few more. So it's a really neat format. If you're looking for a new podcast and you are at midlife, then make sure that you check out his podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Vicki.